This review will be filled to the brim with spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. Even though Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok have tossed every spoiler known to man across the internet anyway, I still feel obliged to give you a spoiler warning. But you know, don't you?
Look, there has to be another way!
There isn't.
I've been putting off doing my Spider-Man No Way Home review, and I'm not really sure why. I did like the movie, I liked it a good deal in some places, but I also didn't like the movie in some others, and I think it has some real problems that really let it down and stop it from being the great Spider-Man movie that I think a lot of people think it to be. And that's absolutely fine. I understand that it gave us what a lot of us wanted for the better part of 2 decades in the return of This Is Your Last Chance.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts.
Tugboat
Surprise,
and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and that was fantastic. It was cool to see them, and I do think they were used better than expected. My main concern going into it was that they would show up at the end, a la Portals and Endgame, and then they would immediately go after having an action scene, and they'd maybe exchange like 1 or 2 words with our Peter Parker, Tom Holland's Peter Parker. That didn't happen. We got a few key scenes with them, a few nice little exchanges of dialogue, and we actually got like quite distinct personalities from each of them, which I really liked. You had Tobey Maguire as sort of kind of like the elder Spider-Man that's been through all of this and is guiding the younger Tom Holland into not, going down a path of pure revenge. And I thought that was really nice the way that concluded, where he stopped Tom Holland trying to murder Goblin with his own glider, also confirming that Tugboat is the strongest spider. He also webbed up Andrew Garfield. I will be taking no further questions on the matter. He's the strongest spider, canon. So that was really nice. And then I also liked how Andrew Garfield was characterised as kind of like this romantic, overly emotive Spider-Man. Even though he's only just met them for like 5 minutes, he's already like, oh, I love you guys, I've always wanted to have brothers and all this sort of stuff. And I also liked how self-deprecating he was, almost in a meta way, when Tugboat and Holland are talking about the aliens they fought and all the cool stuff they've done. And he's like, oh, no, I'm lame, I just fought like a Russian guy in a rhino outfit. You feel that because he didn't get the same challenges and the same cool shit to do like the other 2 Spider-Men did.
Never!
I crush, so I kill you! I destroy you!
You're literally the worst adaptation of Rhino ever! And I think being open about that makes his character a lot more endearing, particularly to people that didn't like The Amazing Spider-Man or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. For all you Garfield lovers out there, I can confirm that this movie is the best he's ever been, and I really, really enjoyed Andrew Garfield in the role of Spider-Man in this movie. I would happily see him again in that role, and that's not something I ever thought I would have been saying coming out of the last 2 movies that featured him.
I wish I could just... I can't.
And as much as it seemed kind of expected based on the trailers, yes, it was pretty cool that he got to catch MJ and then cry about it. That was quite a cathartic release. So in terms of their characterization and seeing a bit of the banter between all 3 Spider-Men and seeing, them get on and form sort of an emotional bond was nice. However, I do think the way in which both Spider-Men come into the story is really quite awful. You've got a great scene with the Green Goblin, Peter and Aunt May that sets up some real stakes. We'll get into that in a minute. And then right after that, you just cut to MJ and Ned, and they're just like, oh, it'd be really great if Peter was here right now, and then they just use the sling ring, and suddenly, not 1, but 2 alternate universe Peter Parkers just come into the fray. And from there on out, it's a completely different movie. That's the movie that we've come to see, the 3 Spider-Men together. Structurally, it's really weird, and I feel like this could have been almost 2 movies. And if it had been split in half, maybe both halves would have been served better. On the one hand, you've got a movie about Spider-Man collecting villains that have fallen through the multiverse, and the fallout from that, the fallout from what the Green Goblin wants, what he does to Peter, how he manipulates the other members, the other villains in this Sinister Five, and where that goes. And then you've got another movie which is Andrew Garfield and Tugboat coming into the MCU, and the pair of them almost getting to take part in like a multi-Doctor special with Tom Holland's Peter Parker.
Oh, lovely!
And the movie just about manages to mash these two massive things together into one cohesive whole. Yes, it makes sense that the other Spider-Men would come down to help Peter stop all these other villains, but the way they're introduced I just think is the opposite of cinematic, honestly. They just walk in. And I don't understand why that's the case, because if you just go back a few years to what the Russo brothers were doing in stuff like Infinity War and Endgame, it's got the craft that I'm talking about. Like, for example, Captain America, who had only been off our screens for 2 years. Compare that to Tugboat's like 17. He'd only been off the screen for 2 years, he'd gone into hiding. When he comes in the Edinburgh sequence in Infinity War, that is a moment. When he catches the spear and comes out of the darkness, when Wanda and the Vision need him the most, when the musical score stings in, like, it's a really memorable scene. And then you've got like Thor arriving in Wakanda, that's a memorable moment.
There's too many of them!
You know, I'm talking about scenes where characters are introduced with some fanfare, with some ceremony. Tugboat and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man don't get that at all. I'm not saying they needed to have dramatic entrances exactly like those Russo examples, but I expect a little bit more than just a sling ring opening up and then both stepping in. And the explanation as to where they were is really strange. They both say that they've just been kicking around in New York trying to find Peter and the other characters. Well, first off, they seem to have made no headway at all. And second, this is a really weird retread of a beat from Spider-Verse, because in Spider-Verse, Spider-Gwen is thrown into the city and she has to hang out there for a couple of days before everything kicks off with Miles and Peter B. Parker. And in that time, she integrates herself into the school, she gets closer to Miles, and she intervenes to stop Dr. Octopus. So she's used really well up until the reveal that she is a Spider-Person. And there's nothing like that comparatively here.
Your entrance was good, his was better.
There's no solid solution as to what Peter 2 and Peter 3 were doing when they got dropped into this universe up until the point that Ned and MJ call for them. And I just think it's a signifier of how sloppy the structure of this movie is.
People, let's do this one last time.
Because you can tell they've got too many villains, hence why Lizard doesn't get a battle scene. We're just told that Doctor Strange apprehended him. By the way, I want to see that scene, Lizard versus Doctor Strange. We just cut away from that? We never see that? Come on! Before I go into more detail on No Way Home, I want to quickly talk about today's sponsor, Bosley.
Time to fly.
Now, I don't know about you, but as a young man in my 20s, I like to occasionally take a sneak peek just to make sure it's not creeping back at all. It's the same, it's the same. Bosley are America's #1 hair restoration experts, having helped millions of men and women with over 430,000 restorative procedures over a 45-year history. From one-day restorative procedures to low-level laser therapy or FDA-approved medication that can help you keep the hair you have and help you grow thicker, fuller hair, there are options for every stage of hair loss. Bosley have over 70 locations across the US and the option for home delivery, as well as free in-person and video consultations. There's no shame in letting that head of hair fade gracefully, but if you don't want to go for a Patrick Stewart or a Jason Statham, then consider giving Bosley a go. Hair loss is something that affects millions of people around the world and is nothing to be ashamed of, but if you want to prevent hair loss, starting early is key. Click the link in my description for your free Bosley info kit and a $250 gift card towards a procedure. Anyway, back to No Way Home. There's too much to get through in the first act in terms of explaining away the court of public opinion with Peter and him having to lawyer up and all of the charges levied against him, and then him going to Doctor Strange and trying to get everyone to forget. And then there's a whole load of new characters introduced in the second act, all of the villains, and that's a lot piled onto the movie, and then the extra Spider-Man. And it just about manages to do it in 2 hours and 30 minutes. I'm really surprised the internet hasn't torn apart the movie for some of Peter's decisions. Everyone was up in arms over him almost getting Midtown High's best and brightest killed by a Stark drone, but in this he recklessly endangers countless lives in New York, and the only thing that saves him from being culpable is the plot. Sure, the idea that Peter refuses to let the villains die and wants to rehabilitate rather than incarcerate is great. I really like that about the movie, and the idea that these villains are merely trying to stay alive gives them an appropriately sympathetic edge. I get why Peter turns on Strange. I even understand the idea that Peter would let them all free out of their cages in the Sanctum. But why on earth would he move them across the city? These are not 2-bit crooks. All of these guys are serial murderers. Electro literally states that he's willing to fry more people if Peter's plan fails. The Lizard is more than happy to turn people into reptiles again. Norman Osborn could become the Goblin at any moment. Half of them have incredibly powerful abilities that could whip up a mass murder in seconds if they so choose. I'm all for some prison reform, but I wouldn't try and rehabilitate the son of Sam by taking him to my mum's for tea and biscuits, would I? The idea that Peter would let them go to Aunt May's apartment without any kind of contingency whatsoever is insane. When the villains turn on him, it's a surprise to nobody but Peter Parker. And as I said, the script saves Peter the guilt of getting a bunch of New Yorkers killed, because for some reason when the villains escape, they disappear until the Spider-Men send for them in the third act. There's literally a gap in the movie where all kinds of murder and mayhem could have been exploited by the Goblin and his new lackeys, and instead, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. It's weird how not so long ago people said that Spider-Man 3 was too overstuffed because it had 3 villains, but this movie has 5 villains to get through and 3 Spider-Men, and it really does fight to squeeze everything in. Like, for example, what I was saying about the villains terrorising the city when they're set free. If they wanted to explore that in any satisfying or meaningful way and juggle the returning spiders on top, the movie would need to be at least 20 to 30 minutes longer. Now we're starting to look at endgame length. But then again, that movie was briefly the highest grossing movie in the world, so maybe this movie could have benefited from a bit more. At the very least, if they're not going to terrorise the citizens of New York, I want to at least see them have a conversation. You know, were they hauled up in some abandoned pier, mulling over their existence like Ock in Spider-Man 2? If that's the case, I'll take it, but you need to show me what they're doing. You need to give me something. By comparison, in the first Spider-Man movie, you know what the Green Goblin is up to the entire time, and you bounce from motivation to motivation. He's trying to get even at the board at Oscorp.
How am I?
And then when he decides that he wants to torment Spider-Man and attack the Heart, he does that relentlessly. So it's just strange that by comparison, the exact same character just disappears and doesn't attempt to kill any civilians to spite Peter or anything. Simply put, we needed more time to flesh out the villains, their motivations, and also flesh out the scenes with the 3 Spider-Men. As the current cut stands, I think it's paced really well, but it just batters characters at you so much that we don't get especially too much time with them. The characters that truly matter to the plot are Holland's Parker, the Goblin, May, and MJ. Everyone else has some great moments and scenes, but don't get nearly enough time with the audience to settle into anything truly interesting.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, was utterly fantastic from start to finish, and I just love how Willem Dafoe refuses to phone this in. He could have just cashed his check along with the other villains. He didn't even have to be part of the action, and he insisted.
Listen, I don't want to just pop in there as a cameo. I want to do the action because that's fun for me, and also it's really impossible to add any integrity or any fun to the character if you don't participate in these things, because all that action stuff informs your relationship to the characters and the story.
All of that enthusiasm, the fact that he wants to be part of the action, it all plays into the movie, and you see it. He has a fantastic fight with Peter in the apartment block, and it is brutal, and he does get to kick his ass. It's a great moment when Tom Holland's just wailing on Norman and he's just grinning at him. And he has some great speeches.
So, Green Goblin has a case to state this time. A philosophy of life. It's not just about some kind of abstract muscle twirling.
I'm an idea.
This character has not skipped a beat from 2002. He's fully realised here, and the fact that he gets to kill Aunt May and do something that will have lasting ramifications for this Spider-Man, not even his universe's Spider-Man, is awesome. Honestly, I felt like it was always a problem trying to top both Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and Alfred Molina's Doc Ock from the Raimi movies, and I think it's actually the wisest decision to just not try and top it and just bring them in. This Green Goblin and Tom Holland's Peter Parker already have a bona fide relationship, and the fact that he survives past the closing credits beckons him to come back again. I mean, who knows, maybe at the end of the college trilogy he could come back in another multiversal way, and it could be like the rematch. We could get King Goblin. You know, we all kind of assume that the Green Goblin will be framed as the big bad for Peter at some point down the line, but he says that Oscorp doesn't exist, so you know what, I'd actually be okay with his Green Goblin always being the Green Goblin from another universe. Just bring him back when you want to. We've already put in all the legwork here, and he's killed Aunt May. I don't think another Green Goblin could feasibly come in and top that. Jamie Foxx's Electro was another villain I thought was served really, really well. You tell he was having a lot of fun with the performance. You know, I kind of like who I am in this universe. I would, Jamie, I would. You went from being a Dr. Manhattan ripoff to looking far more comic accurate, looking way cooler in your Tims. Great to see. And I also thought he had a great scene with Garfield at the end, where he said like, yeah, you know, I was a loser before and all this, and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is the one to pump him up. That was great.
Alfred?
For me, it's just about the money.
But then we come to Doc Ock, and I think Doc Ock is a bit of a mixed bag. You may remember I did a video called Don't Ruin Doc Ock, in which I spoke about the idea that I would be massively underwhelmed if they made him a villain. Doc Ock has a really neat character arc in Spider-Man 2, and he gets redeemed at the end, and then he dies in a very, very definitive way, and I was worried that bringing him back would ruin that arc and would undo it. What is important to me is maintaining that character arc from the absolutely perfect second Raimi movie, because if you undo that and you make him go back to his villainous ways without a satisfying reason or in a way that made it worth our time for the character to come back, then that's going to be really sore. You could get your evil Doc Ock a multitude of ways, but a lot of them just feel like they would be a cheat to me. Mind control and amnesia would make the return of Doc Ock feel arbitrary, as if bringing back that version of the character doesn't matter at all. It seems like you either make him evil and you go back on what you did in Spider-Man 2, or you do the redemption arc again, which would feel weak, I think. It's redundant. So in my humble opinion, I think a good, clean way to keep the character intact while still getting your money's worth is to reveal his true allegiances lie with Peter Parker. And look, I think Alfred Molina gives a tremendous performance in this movie, and every scene he's in is a delight. And it is because that performance is so good, and because much like Willem Dafoe and Jamie Foxx, his version of that villain is so engaging that I wouldn't want anyone else. So I'm glad that Alfred Molina's there, and I think the movie would lose something if he wasn't in it. However, they just repeat his arc again, but worse. What this movie constitutes as redemption for each villain varies, and it's really weird. It can't decide whether the villains need to be redeemed of their own volition, or whether it needs to be forced upon them and their powers need to be stripped away. At the end of Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock's arms are still in control when he makes the decision to get them to listen to him. That decision is spurred on by Peter's words, by him talking about what Aunt May said, by him saying what Ock said to him earlier on in the movie, and it's a moment where Otto Octavius has an epiphany. He says no to the arms and to their control, and he completes his character arc, and it's massively powerful because it banks on those relationships that have been formed across the movie, and it makes sense for him to come to that decision.
Listen to me now.
Whereas in Spider-Man No Way Home, he is forced against his will to have a new inhibitor chip installed, and he is kicking and screaming right up until Tom Holland puts it in his neck, at which point he switches off, and then he's really happy that he's been redeemed. Doc Ock doesn't truly get redeemed, he just gets pushed into the mould that this Peter Parker wants him to be. It's nowhere near as good as the redemption in 2, and dare I say, it really undercuts it. Then we get to Sandman and the Lizard. Sandman and the Lizard just flat out sucked in this movie, and I honestly think the movie would have been better without them in it. Sandman, much like Doc Ock, was redeemed the last time we saw him. So for him to decide to turn against Spider-Man undoes that.
I forgive you.
It's been a really meaningful experience, Spider-Man.
Several bad puns later.
Fuck off, Spider-Man. It doesn't make sense for him to do that. It makes sense for Doc Ock, Electro and Green Goblin to turn on Spider-Man and Doctor Strange when they're told that they're going to return to their home universes, because they will die.
Die, Jedi gods! What did I say?
But Sandman and the Lizard won't. So I don't understand, in any context, why they wouldn't just be like, yeah, okay, we're just going to wait for Peter to do whatever he can do and try and redeem the other villains, and oh look, Goblin's gone and flown out the window and Doc Ock's gone off and so's Electro, but you know what, Spider-Man, it's okay because all I want to do is go and see my daughter, so you have the quickest route to get there still, in spite of everything that's just happened, because the Green Goblin isn't going to get you home, so why does he turn against him? He could just sit there. You know what, he doesn't even need to be part of proceedings at all. He could literally say to Spider-Man, look, you seem very trusting, I've been redeemed before, I'm not going to hurt anyone, just let me pop to the cafe, I'll have a fry-up, wait for all this to blow over.
And wait for all this to blow over.
And then when you hit the button on the Doctor Strange MacGuffin box, I'll just get sent home. No fuss. It makes no sense for him to turn on the Spider-Men at all. Why does he do that? He's delaying his own reunion with his daughter. You might argue the Lizard wants to stay in this universe so that he can try and convert a new universe of people into his Lizard Men, but weak, and he didn't die in his universe either, so there's no reason for him to be scared for Peter to push the button or to agree to his plan. They just kind of seem to side with Norman because the script says so. And you know what, maybe I'd be more forgiving if Thomas Hayden Church and Rhys Ifans were actually in the movie, but they're not. They lend their voices to the characters. Yes, it makes sense that Lizard stays in his lizard form, but it makes no sense that Sandman doesn't go back to Thomas Hayden Church. When Sandman first came on the screen, and the way he did in terms of the plot, I really groaned. Really disappointing that both villains stay in their superpowered forms until the very end, and then it's stock footage from The Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 3. A really odd decision. Could you really not get Thomas Hayden Church? You're Disney, you've got all the money. Even with COVID restrictions, I fail to see how you couldn't have stuffed a truckload, 10 truckloads of money outside Thomas Hayden Church's door and get him to do just a couple of scenes. And on top of that, I could excuse them wedging the Sandman and Lizard in here if they were trying to do a Sinister Six. But for some reason, Spider-Man, the superhero who's known for having a team of 6 villains, in his big third-part trilogy finale, fights a Sinister 5. What? I feel like this is the perfect time to do a Sinister Six. And you stop at 5? If you're going to stop at 5, you might as well have stopped at 3. There's no need for Lizard and Sandman to be in the movie. Doc Ock is only in the movie because he's so entertaining, but they repeat his arc, and that sucks. I don't know if I set up some false expectations for myself when I saw things like Tom Holland in the lead up to this movie saying we used the Raimi cam on set, we called it the Raimi cam, and we do like push-ins and POV shots and that kind of stuff. I think maybe I was expecting a level of craft on par with the fights and the action and spectacle in those first 2 Raimi movies. And to be fair, maybe that's an unfair expectation that I put on the movie. But still, when you've got people out there saying that this movie is the greatest Spider-Man movie ever made, that's a high bar to contend with. Not only do we have the craft of Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, but you already have a great, near perfect Spider-Verse, multiverse Spider-Man movie in Spider-Verse.
Remember, what makes you different is what makes you Spider-Man.
And I think that's the most depressing thing is every problem I have with this movie, the sloppy plot structure, the spectacle, they're all things that I can point to other Spider-Man movies and say that Spider-Man movie did it better. Here's how you do it. Spider-Verse juggles Miles' origin story and 4 other Spider-Men, and they all get used really well, and 3 of them get to kick around for pretty much the entire movie.
Whip and release it. Whip, release, whip and release.
Comparatively, this film feels like each act is just working to build towards a character's return. The first act just feels like it's trying to get you to the Doc Ock bridge scene, and then from there on out, we're just waiting for all of this to fall apart so that Tugboat and Andrew can turn up. And that's when the movie really begins. You look at the reaction to this movie, that's what everyone went to see. And I think partly why this movie has been so well received in the whirlwind of hype that's happened post-release is because we got exactly what we wanted. We weren't 100% sure that Tugboat and Andrew were going to be in it. We were pretty sure. The leaks had happened. But of course, no one was 100% sure. So to be given that on the big screen, and for many of us, for me, for many of you, to be in a packed cinema screening with everyone cheering and hollering at those moments, it is a great time, and it is a memorable cinema experience. But I think once the hype has died down on this movie and the dust has settled, I think that the problems that are clear will just continue to permeate. It's a good movie, but it's not a great movie. There's a lot of fan service in this movie, a lot of fan jerking, and I think most of it works and feels like it's organic to the story, and that is in no small part due to the fact that the actors sell it with heart. But there's other moments of fan service which I just felt completely pandered to. I think there's tons of more creative ways that Andrew and Tugboat could have been folded into the story, and if you want me to come up with examples for that, I don't need to, because you just go look at Spider-Verse and the way that Peter B. Parker and Spider-Gwen factor into those stories. The fight scenes with Goblin were good, no question, they were good. But they weren't Raimi tier.
You've spun your last web, Spider-Man.
Perfection. Perfection.
They didn't have the craft of a cinematographer like Bill Pope on Spider-Man 2 with the train sequence.
Perfection. Perfection.
Also, for two Spider-Men that both have really iconic, really memorable scores that fans love, I didn't think they used the scores enough. There was a few moments where they dropped them in, but, you know, like that Raimi Danny Elfman score in particular, when the choirs start and it really ramps up, you want to feel that.
I'm Spider-Man.
You know what I mean? And there was never a point where Toby swung in and the theme was really on fire. And I just feel like it's such a missed opportunity. I don't think there was a single bit of action in the finale that was good. It was all really dark. I think the choice of location is really dull. And I think it just ends up being the Spider-Man running around through a load of scaffolding against green screen. I don't think them swinging together was shot particularly well. I think the moment when they jump off initially and swing around and then land on the Statue of Liberty head was probably like the best moment. But even then, I don't think it was delivered nearly as well as any of those examples earlier from Infinity War Endgame. And like with Doc Ock, the redemption arcs for all of these villains are thrust upon them, so it doesn't work. I think the worst one is Electro, because there is no convincing him when he's powered up. He's not gonna switch sides. He's not gonna listen to the other Spider-Men. He's gone full villain. And then it's only when he's depowered that him and Andrew Garfield have that chat where he's like, I was a nobody, and Andrew Garfield makes him feel better. That should have come either before he was depowered, or they should have tried to depower him and it shouldn't have worked, and then Andrew should have had to have said that stuff to get him to calm down, because then that would have been an arc. Electro would have been in control of his own choices. When the Lizard says that they either die or go with Peter, and that's really no choice at all, he's completely right, and the movie doesn't really interrogate that in a satisfying way, and I think that's really strange. The way the villains are redeemed in this is like, if you had Spider-Man 2, right? The first time Doc Ock creates the machine in Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man pulls the plug.
What are you doing? Pulling the plug!
He forces that moment. And then at the end of the movie, he pulls the plug again, except this time it doesn't work. The machine is self-sustaining.
Now what?
So he has to go and appeal to Doc Ock's humanity in order to save the day. He goes over to him and they just have a conversation.
I can't destroy it.
I won't. You once spoke to me about intelligence. That it was a gift to be used for the good of mankind.
A privilege.
That's what should have happened with Electro getting depowered in this movie, and with Sandman getting depowered, and with the Lizard being cured. They shouldn't have just had it thrust upon them. These things shouldn't have worked, and then the Spider-Men should have been the ones to have to talk these villains out of doing these bad deeds.
It was my dream.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to forcibly change you to get you to align to our morality, rather than me saying something meaningful in this moment to incite you to change yourself. This movie's finale is like if Tugboat pulled the plug on the second machine, and then it worked, and Doc Ock was redeemed, and the machine was done, and they got to go home afterwards. Aunt May's death was really well done. I particularly liked how she didn't get like the Hollywood Marion Cotillard's Dark Knight Rises ending of just kind of, you know, passing away. She sort of faded out and bled out, and I feel like it made that moment far darker than it initially seemed like it was going to be. I also do really like that she says, with great power comes great responsibility, fantastic. However, what I do resent is this idea that Marvel was planning this trilogy-long origin story all along, and that the ending moment in the film where Peter doesn't have Stark tech and he's made his own suit, it looks like the classic suit, and he's renting out an apartment, that this was always where it was supposed to be going. The only reason they put in the with great power comes great responsibility thing and made Aunt May this character was in response to the criticism of the last two movies, that it was too Stark focused, that Aunt May didn't have enough dramatic things to do. And so it's not saying it's like an origin story in 3 parts, and isn't it satisfying that he's gone through all these things to get there, just doesn't quite work for me. I was tired of this long-form origin story when Sherlock did it in its 4th season. That was a show about Sherlock and John from the start, but the big climactic ending is supposed to evoke the feeling that they have only now become the legends we know them to be. Sure, it's cool that Peter ends the movie in his classic costume without Stark tech, but are you really cheering for something that came as standard in the other movies? From the very beginning?
It's Spider-Man!
I've had a few comments on my MCU Spidey Suits video saying that No Way Home fixes the point I raised, but it doesn't really. Spider-Man goes through 5 different looks: the red and black, the Iron Spider, the black and gold inside-out suit, the integrated suit, and the classic red and blue. That's an awful lot of action figures. By comparison, Tobey and Andrew's suits still look great, they don't need to have any alterations at all. Sure, the Gold Spider is a signifier of Otto's rehashed redemption, but I don't think it's compelling enough of a moment to warrant yet another variation on his suit. The red and black was great, and would have been more than enough to differentiate him from the others. Ditch the inside-out nonsense, ditch the Iron Spider, and just keep him in the red and black until that final moment at the end of the movie. Would have made that costume change all the more important. I really like MJ and Ned. I think they're really likeable characters, and I really liked the trifecta that we got in this movie. It feels like it's really developed since Homecoming, and it was really great to see. And also, yeah, it is really harrowing that Parker doesn't get to speak to them anymore and has to make them forget him. Very Donna Noble. However, I know no one's going to agree with me on this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think it's a real shame that this is perhaps the last Spider-Man live-action high school movie we're going to get for a long time, at least with this iteration of the character, and it all gets completely sidestepped to do something else. Like, I thought the whole point of this home trilogy was that we were going to see Peter Parker go through high school and then graduate. And there is a nice bit of that in terms of him trying to get into MIT and then looking through the letters to see if they got in. I thought that was all really nice. But in terms of all the high school stuff, the teachers have a cameo and then they're gone, and they were central characters in the last two movies. Betty Brant, Flash, they all have reduced roles, and it just kind of feels like the high school stuff gets dropped because we don't want to do the high school stuff anymore. Now we want to do a movie about all the villains and all the Spider-Men crashing into the movie. Peter Parker navigating this court of public opinion and his court case and meeting Daredevil and having to navigate that last year of high school hoping to get into college would have been enough of a movie in of itself. I also really like Doctor Strange's role in this movie. I think Doctor Strange and Peter have a much more natural team up than, say, Spider-Man and Iron Man. They're the Ditko boys. And I also like that it brings magic into Spider-Man's world. Also, they have a really nice dynamic. I think it's less kind of like sometimes forced father-son relationship with Stark and more of a, you know, a bit of a dramatic, moody uncle thing that Doctor Strange has got going on with Peter. I legitimately loved this sequence in the mirror dimension, even if it's clearly like, Far From Home had a cool scene with weird shit that everybody loved. Can we do that again in this movie? We've got Doctor Strange. Perfect. I was wondering how Spider-Man was going to take on Strange at all, but seeing him have control of his astral projections and then use his knowledge of math to trap the wizard was great. I also enjoyed the fact that Peter could barely believe he'd beaten him. I really like that he calls attention to the fact that he's a kid, and that, you know, like all this stuff, of course it's going to be a lot for him, of course he's going to make stupid decisions. And I really liked the way that Strange treated him, you know, he didn't treat him like an idiot, and he didn't belittle him for wanting to keep these villains alive. He actually really understood his point of view, and you could tell that he empathised with him, and he wanted things to be different. I feel like the way the lines were delivered and cut in the trailers, it seemed like Strange was going to be up to his usual unfeeling, slightly dickish self. But I actually really liked that, you know, he understood where Peter was coming from, and I feel like he really likes Peter. And actually, because he really likes Peter, he really wanted to do right by him.
I'm sorry, kid.
Yeah, me too.
Don't.
It's just so strange to see Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in this universe talking about the existence of magic and the Avengers and hearing about Thanos. Like, it's just something I never thought I would see. I grew up on the Batman changing every couple of years, and that was just the thing, you know, you have one Batman go, another Batman comes in, and it seemed like that was what was going to be the norm for Spider-Man as well. So to now sort of recontextualize it as this is all one kind of big continuity, and these are all multiverse men that can meet and cross over at any time, it's just utterly surreal. And as much as I think they could have done more with them in this movie, if it turns out that this is more of an introduction to their reintroduction, then maybe I don't think it would be quite so bad. I mean, Sony want to build their own Spider-Man cinematic universe anyway. I'd much rather they did it with iterations of Tugboat and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man than they did with Jared Leto's Morbius. I mean, honestly, who gives a shit?
Are you mad?
I am Venom. I'm just kidding. It's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service.
Matt Smith should have been Morbius. That would get me hyped for that movie. Why is he playing a no-name detective? Why does Matt Smith always get the shaft? And that reminds me, because I'm thinking about Palpatine now, Palpatine was used really well in this movie. Far better than The Rise of Skywalker. Although thinking about The Rise of Skywalker, the essence of the problems I have with this movie are kind of similar to that, just in nowhere near as bad a way as in The Rise of Skywalker. Like, this is a movie. Make no mistake, this is a movie with a beginning, middle and end, with characters that are likeable, and character arcs, and spectacle, even if it doesn't all quite come together. Whereas The Rise of Skywalker is a commercial for action figures for 2 hours. It's, dreadful. Dreadful. Overall, I did like Spider-Man No Way Home, but I don't think it's the mind-blowing experience that people are making it out to be. When all of this hype dies down, we'll be looking at a very different experience. I'm not sure where I'd rank it in terms of my Spider-Man movie ranking, because it is better than Spider-Man 3. I don't think as a movie it works as cohesively as Homecoming, even though I think it's got higher highs, if that makes sense. The problems with it bring it down. So I think I might have to go from the top: Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 1, Spider-Verse, Homecoming, No Way Home. Maybe with time that could change. Maybe it could go higher up. I certainly hope it doesn't go any lower. Marvel have recently worked with 3 key Spider-Man alumni: director Sam Raimi, DP Bill Pope, and Tobey Maguire. But bizarrely, Marvel didn't think to combine these forces. Instead, Bill Pope was whisked away to Shang-Chi, where he brought home some seriously well-composed action. The kind of action that No Way Home desperately needs, outside of 2 scenes with the Green Goblin. Seriously, those hand-to-hand moments, they were awesome, both times. But that's the only bit of fisticuffs that stirred anything in me. Everything else is sloppy as hell and underwhelming in the wake of the Raimi Pope sandwich we've gotten in the past. Seriously, how do you know the train fight in Spider-Man 2 exists and you give us this highway scene? Like, it's fine, it's okay. The worst thing about it is when Ock gets punked by the nanotech he just stole. And thus a villain that was once a lot of trouble to take down is beaten by a little bit of Stark tech. Marvel can bring back Raimi, Pope, Maguire, but capturing the magic that occurred when all 3 worked together many years ago is much harder to do. I'm glad that people are enjoying this movie, and I'm glad people got everything that they wanted, and I'm glad that we're seeing kind of a renaissance for Andrew Garfield. He deserves it, his Spider-Man deserves it, and I'm glad that we got to see Tugboat, because he is my boy, and I love him a lot. But in terms of the best Spider-Man movie that we could have gotten, the most satisfying narrative we could have gotten, the best paced, best structured movie we could have gotten, the best spectacle we could have gotten, well framed, well composed, well cut, well scored, I think we're lacking in those departments. I don't know, I think it was Game of Thrones and Rise of Skywalker in 2019 combined with this ongoing, never fucking ending debate that Scorsese kicked off about whether Marvel movies are cinema or not. I really wish people listened to what Scorsese said rather than just getting defensive and worrying that these films do not constitute cinema and therefore a high enough standard of art to be enjoyed. Because that was never what he was saying in the first place. He was saying that it sucks that this stuff means there's no room for anything else. When Disney is opening the biggest movies of the year every single year, and it's getting to the stage where it's pushing out the opportunity for other things to be experienced, then these movies need to be the dog's bollocks. They need to be really, really good. Otherwise, I feel like I can't separate the resentment I have for that system from the quality of the movie. And I know for a lot of people, they can. If you can, that's fine. But I just feel like it's starting to get to the point where, you know, they're just churning these out, and more of them are becoming misses than hits. I haven't even watched Hawkeye, and I've heard it's fine. It's fine, great, but I'm not hyped for it, and I guess I'll catch it at some point. Like, Spider-Man's different. Spider-Man's a bit of an MVP, but I wasn't that hyped for Eternals. I thought Shang-Chi was fun, but it's kind of a Marvel origin movie that we've seen before, and I think if it had come out in 2011, I would have loved it a lot more. And it's not really the fault of the movie, it's more the fault of how many of these we've had and how long in the tooth this MCU has become. And I thought Black Widow was pretty bad, and it shows no signs of stopping. I don't know, I just feel like the MCU itself has just kind of missed a step with the filmmaking. I feel like it more often than not is actors standing against green screens, filling in bits of dialogue, or badly shot action scenes with no fanfare. Shut up. Like 2014, the Russos and James Gunn made 2 fantastic superhero movies, and I don't think No Way Home is as good as either of those. What we wanted was to see the Spider-Men together, and they made us wait to find out if that was what we were going to get, so that it was a surprise. And I think because surprises are so rare in blockbusters now, that even when it's leaked all over the internet, even when we pretty much do know what's going to happen, we still crave that feeling of satisfaction.
We crave mystery, because there's none left.
Once the surprise is done, I think the joys of Spider-Man No Way Home are fairly fleeting. A big thank you to my full fat tier patrons, Dr. Cheekade and Craig Hurst. If you want to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos. And if you want to find me on Twitter, that's at fullfatvideos. Until next time, do something with milk, I guess.